We are gathered here together to meet with Him. God is in this place. So I invite you this morning to, as we sing, as we talk about Him, as we talk to Him, well, talk to Him. He is in this place. So I'm going to give you some space. Maybe say good morning. Maybe you didn't have time to kind of connect with Him real quick this morning. It's like, hey, good morning, Father. So I'll give you a little bit of time. The King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is mine. Would you stand? Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is. Let's sing this again. Let the King of my be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, is my song. You tell Him, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, so good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. Oh, let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, He is my song. You are good, good. He never will. You're never gonna let, you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let, you're never gonna let me down. You know, sometimes there's statements that we need to make. People need to hear something. And there's sometimes statements that we make to acknowledge that we acknowledge something. God does not need to know that He's not going to let us down. He knows that. We're just saying, God, we get it. You're just never going to let me down. So let's sing it again. You're never going to let me down. Take a seat.
At City Church, we say that we are a church with two front doors, and where that comes from actually is a verse tucked into the middle of Acts 5. It says, as the early church was meeting, it says, day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. And there's a couple things there that we see almost the strategy of the early church. One, there was a frequency. It says day after day. But also it said they met in the temple courts, which could have held hundreds, if not a couple thousand. And they also met from house to house. And so there was a dichotomy that they were moving large and small, large and small. And so we want to model what they were doing. We don't think church is just gathering in this building, although there's some really good things that happen here. We think that what happens in our living room is just as important as what happens on a Sunday morning. And in some ways, it's the outworking, it's the discipleship, it's the formation piece of when the rubber hits the road for our faith. And so we love house groups because we've called them equal to a Sunday morning. And so my ask is, especially as house groups get started back up, be consistent in your house group, first of all, if you're in a group, because your presence, your attendance actually does matter, not just for yourself, but for other people. People gain from your experience. And if you're not in a house group, we say that 50% of what City Church has to offer is in our living rooms. And so you're just not getting the full effect, the full benefit of what it means to be a part of this church until you gather in a living room with other people from this community, calling this place home and pursuing Jesus together.
Good morning. My name is Michelle, if we haven't met yet. So Chris called out that house groups are a huge part of our DNA. And our house groups just started back up this past week. And so if you are not yet connected to a house group, I would encourage you that this is a great week to start. House groups, I want to just call out one specific thing that Chris said, and that is that being part of a house group and connecting with City Church in that way isn't just about you showing up to see what you can get, but it's also that we need you. We need to share together with you. Like, you bring skills and gifts and talents and experiences that our community needs. And so I just encourage you, if you haven't connected yet, this is a great week to start. You can go downstairs after service. There will be a table down there. There's a big house group sign at the Connect table. And we'll have our house group leaders will be floating around there. Mandy, our house groups director, and Caitlin, our connections director, would love to talk to you and figure out what house group would be a good fit for you to try out. I encourage you to try out a couple. If you're new to City Church, try a couple, see which one feels like the right fit. But we would love to have you engaged in house groups, just like you're engaged here on Sunday mornings. I have a couple quick announcements as we get started this morning. The first one is, if you do call this place home and you've been here for a while, we are fueled. Everything we do, we're able to do because of the generosity of people who are part of this community and who are bought into the vision of what God's doing here. And so if you're not giving regularly, I encourage you to do that. If you're interested, you can do that either in the black boxes in the back of the room, or you can go to citychurchotr.com/give and do gifts electronically that way. But that is the way, like, we are financially invested in what God's doing here, and so I encourage you to consider giving. The next thing we have coming up, especially for those who are newer around here, is our Meet City Church lunch. This will take place next Sunday after service from about 12 to 1. This is an opportunity to come and get a free lunch, meet our staff team, and hear a lot about just where City Church OTR started, our vision and values, what we're about. So it's a great way to just kind of understand what we're about and to help you figure out if this is a place that you want to call home and be part of. It's a great way to get connected, as well as meet other folks who might be newer, because I know it can be challenging when you're brand new to figure out who to connect with. And so it's a great opportunity to meet our staff and to meet others. So I would encourage you to join us for that. If you're newer, you can go to our website to RSVP for that, just so we make sure we have enough food, and that's citychurchotr.com/meet. Last thing I wanted to share is just a quick update. So we, back in January, we're talking about taking a team from City Church to Nepal. in April. And that trip was supposed to be leaving this Wednesday, but we just wanted to share that we actually, a couple of weeks ago, had to make the decision to postpone our trip. We're still going. We're working on finalizing exactly what those dates are. It's probably going to be February of next year. But there were some circumstances that happened, and we as a staff team, as leadership, prayed and really sought the Lord of like, should we wait? Do we still go? And we really felt peace that the Lord was saying to wait. And we don't know why. We're excited to see, as time goes by, what the Lord intended and why kind of a last-minute change of plans. But just wanted you guys to know, because some of you were aware that was happening, but we'll be delaying that. I'll also say, if that trip is something that's interesting to you, now that it is delayed until early next year, if that's something you're interested in, I would love to talk to you. There could still be an opportunity for more people to join that team. We have 7 people who are signed up to go, but could take a few more. So if you're interested, I'd love to chat with you, and we can get you more information. I'm going to go ahead and invite up a few people to join me. The first is Chris, and then I'm going to invite up Nick and Daria Box to come join us up front. So Nick is one of the few people at City Church who was actually here on week 1. But Nick and Daria are getting ready to move, and so we wanted to take an opportunity just to pray over them as they get ready to leave.
So Nick and Daria are moving to Arkansas. That's right, Arkansas. Nick has a job with Procter & Gamble. They're moving there. Daria is a nurse and going to nursing school. And anyway, they have been such a blessing to this community. Met Daria a couple years ago, but it was day 1. Not many people, like 40 of us were there in the transept, and Nick was playing cajon that first day. And for like the first year, was the only drummer that we had, so thanks, Nick. And they've been such great leaders in this church, house group leaders, and so, we just want to take an opportunity to send them off well. They're driving out in a couple weeks, so we're going to pray for them. If you feel comfortable, extend a hand, and we're going to pray that this next season is a blessing for them. So, Lord, we thank you for Nick and Daria, and God, we thank you for this new marriage that you have launched them into, and now this new season of going somewhere together and forming a life in a different place and seeking out adventure with you and with each other. And so, Lord, we bless them. We ask that you would keep them safe on the move. The drive would be fun, not stressful, and that you would even give them good friends as soon as they land, that they would say, like, oh, this is who we're going to run with here. Lord, we pray for good, quick friends. Thank you for them. Bless them. And we thank you for the way that they have been a blessing to this community. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, guys.
I love Jesus because he's a bringer of peace, and he'll meet you wherever you're at.
Jesus changed my life when he showed me that I'm more than my mistakes.
I love Jesus because he has shown me what freedom really looks like. Not living a life that I have to hide anymore, but just can be free, be myself, and he has shown me how to do that, and I'm so thankful.
I love Jesus because I can tell you that what I've been able to be blessed with in my life I don't deserve. The way that he's gifted me with my wife and my family and my kids, and just the mission I've been able to do my whole life is far beyond anything I could ever dream, and I would never have the opportunity to do that if it weren't for Jesus who gave me that grace.
So I love Jesus because no matter how many times I mess up, no matter what I've done wrong, he continues to pursue me, and he loves me regardless. I don't have to perform for his love. I don't have to try to earn his approval. He loves me because I'm his beloved son, and that's why I love Jesus.
Good morning. That video, and we're going to see many like it over the next few weeks, is sort of an intro into the series that we're doing. And if you're new here, if you visited last week and this is your second time, or maybe this is your first time here, this church, like I just said, it was started a couple years ago, and it was started around this idea, and it's going to sound really cliche when I say it, but we really authentically mean it. This church is all about Jesus, and the idea around this church is how can we follow him closer? It seems like that's what he set out for his early followers, and that hasn't stopped. And so the big idea is, okay, how can we, as a small community that's newer in the city, follow Jesus more and move the city of Cincinnati towards following him? We want to experience him more. We want to know him more. We want to love Jesus more. And so the big idea for the next few weeks is we're looking at the life of Jesus, and we believe, like the handsome guy in the first video said, that it's done best in family. It's done best around a living room with other people. It's done best with a community. Jesus didn't call us to follow him on our own, but he called us to do it together. And so that's the big idea. If you're new here, we are really trying to figure out, what did Jesus do? What did he ask us to do? How do we become more like him and spend time with him so that we can change a city, so that we can see Cincinnati look more like his kingdom? And so much of what he asked us to do is rooted in a few statements that he made in the book of John. So we're going to go through those over the next few weeks. They're called the I am statements, if you're familiar with that. But it's all rooted, and a lot of what he said is rooted in a passage probably about 1900 years before that. So God is interacting with a guy named Moses, and at this time, his people, the Israelites, they are enslaved in Egypt. They're enslaved under a guy named Pharaoh. And they're crying out to God. They're asking, God, would you send someone? Would you rescue us from this place? And God chooses sort of like a washed-up shepherd in some ways, Moses. And if you're a part of church or not, you've probably heard this story. It's that story where God starts to speak to Moses through the burning bush. And God says, I've chosen you. And I don't want to be like this, but I love what Moses said. He's like, who am I? I mean, he literally says this to a burning bush, to God. He says, who am I that I should go? And God actually doesn't respond and answer his question. He doesn't say who Moses is. He responds and says, I will go with you. And that was God's promise. And you would think that would be enough, but Moses wanted to press a little bit more. And he said this is Exodus 3, verse 13. This is sort of the foundation of what Jesus was speaking on years later. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And what God says there is he says, my name, and God says his name. He says, my name is I am. And this is written in Hebrew. And so the Hebrew word there, it's almost a combination word that God says, and this might be a new one. He says, Yeh. You got to get it in the back of your throat. Yeah, that's what he says. He says, I am, or I will be, or I am who I am. That's how the NIV translates it. I am who I am. But then immediately after that, God realizes, or Moses probably even realizes, I can't introduce myself like that. I am not worthy to say, I am. Moses can't go to the Israelites and say, I am has sent me. And so then God says, but here's what you should tell them. That's the second part of the verse. You should say that I am has sent me. And you've maybe heard this word in Hebrew. He is Yahweh. He says he is, or he will be. God says, this is the name that I want you to say to them, because you can't say the first name. Like, you can't introduce yourself as I am, but you can introduce me as he is. So that's that word Yahweh. And so in this journey through the book of John, where Jesus says a bunch of different statements describing himself, these statements are sort of profound, like I'm, the light of the world or the bread of life. That's a pretty big thing to say. But what's even bigger that we might not catch in 21st century America is that Jesus starts off every one of those with a phrase that would have stirred up a lot of controversy. He says, I am. So he doesn't say, you could liken me to the good shepherd, or I'm a little bit like the light of the world. No, Jesus, probably the most controversial thing he said in any statement was not the descriptor at the end, which are always references back to something else, but it was that first two words at the beginning where Jesus says, I am, a phrase that not even Moses was allowed to say, a phrase that really should have been reserved for God himself. So Jesus takes that phrase, and in a moment, he makes a statement about who he is more than just the statement that follows. And so for the next 6 weeks, this is my ask. We started last week, is one, let's go ahead and assume that Jesus is real. And this is historically kind of a proven fact. Most people believe that Jesus was a real person. The second thing that I'm going to ask that you could just jump in on is, let's assume that John got it right. That Jesus said a statement and then John wrote it down correctly. That John did write down these 7 statements correctly. Because the real question I want to answer over the next 6 weeks, and if you're a Christian, not a Christian, believe something else, this is a big deal to you. What does it mean? What does it mean that he said that? Let's assume that Jesus was a real figure in history, which is almost undisputed. And let's assume that John got it right. If he said those statements, then what does that mean? And who is Jesus? That's what we're asking. Who is Jesus according to Jesus? So we're going to look at some commentators, but we don't really want to know what the commentators say. We don't want to know what I'm saying. Jesus said some things about himself, so we're calling this series Jesus According to Jesus because we want to figure out who did he think that he was. And he said some really cool big things, like I'm the resurrection and the life. We read that last week. I'm the true vine. I am the bread of life. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. But the most exciting one, the one you've definitely been waiting for, is when Jesus said, I am the gate. So cool. So we're starting off with that one this week. I am the gate. All these wonderful descriptors. And then there's one that's just almost out of place. Like, what does that even mean? So we're going to be going verse by verse through John 10, verses 1 through 9. And of course, if we're going to read Jesus' words, we have to get into a first century Jewish mindset. And much of what the Jewish thought was coming out of is Genesis 12, where God makes a promise to Abram. And he says, in the Abrahamic covenant, I'm going to give you three things. I'm going to give you land, I'm going to give you descendants, and I'm going to bless you to bless all people. And if you read through the rest of Genesis, you get to the end, you realize that God has given his people descendants. Abram had no descendants, now they have descendants at the end of Genesis. Then you get to the sixth book, and at the beginning of Joshua, God's made good on his promise. They now also have land. They have descendants to fill the land. And so God's moving pretty quickly, 6 books in, and he's already done 2/3 of the promise. And then it slows way down. And all of Israel is waiting. When's the blessing that's going to bless others? And from Joshua to Malachi, nothing happens there. There's glimpses, there's building of expectation, but there is no person that has brought that blessing to all people. And there's thoughts of maybe it's David, but no, David says it's not him. And the expectation, I want you to imagine, for most of your Bible, it's primarily a building of expectation of when's the blessing coming? Who's the blessing coming through? And then Jesus says this, and he's speaking to the Pharisees. We know that from John 9. But John 10, verse 1 says, "Truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber." And Jesus is using something that would have been common of the day. He's using shepherding language, which everybody would have had an image of. That's more of a struggle for us. I don't know anybody that's a shepherd here. But we have to enter into it. So Jesus is using an image of shepherding, but he's saying it not to shepherds, but he's saying it to religious leaders. And immediately, these religious leaders, these men that would have had likely most of the Hebrew Bible memorized, would have started going to certain passages in their mind. And maybe you can think of a couple of them, like maybe you would go to Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." That's the shepherding imagery we think of. Or Jeremiah 3, where God says, "I'm going to give you a new shepherd." But likely, what the Pharisees would have gone to is a whole chapter about a shepherd that was going to come. And really what God was saying is, I'm not pleased with my current shepherds. He's not talking about literal. He's talking about the shepherds of my flock, the shepherds of my people, the priests. And so tucked into the middle of the Old Testament, Ezekiel 34, God says, I'm not pleased with my shepherds. I'm going to send a new shepherd. And he says this. He says, when I do that, I'm going to make, this is verse 25, I'm going to make a covenant of peace with them and eliminate dangerous animals in the land so that they may live securely in the wilderness and sleep in the forest. I will make them and the area around my hill, it's a reference to Jerusalem, a blessing. I will send down showers in their season, showers of blessing. And so again, Jesus starts to speak, and immediately images and passages would have started coming to mind. Oh, he's talking about the shepherd. He's using shepherding language. He's talking about that. And in the whole Old Testament, all the way up to Jesus, people would have been asking this question. When's the final covenant? When's the blessing that you promised Abram? When's the blessing that you wrote about in Ezekiel? And Jesus starts to use shepherding language. And every commentary that I read on this, when you read John 10, they felt the need to describe and even give images to Near Eastern shepherding in the first century, which is ridiculous because we're all super familiar with it. But just in case you're not, Jesus talks a lot about a sheep pen. This is what a sheep pen would have looked like. This is sort of what Jesus would have been talking about. And if you look at other pictures, it's actually, it's taller than a man, and it's much bigger than at least I would have anticipated it. And so you would have this big sheep pen, and it would be built of rock, but then on the top they would put thorns or maybe pieces of stone, sharp stone or glass, so that nothing or no one could climb over the top. And that's important because this is now what Jesus is talking about. And this would have primarily just been used at night. It wouldn't have been used during the day. And again, this is outdated. None of us here are familiar, or at least using one of these regularly. Here's a 21st century example of what Jesus is referring to about climbing over. And this is in Hollywood, or fathers, you probably get this, but there's always this reference to some boy climbing up some window to get to some girl. And tomorrow, I will have an 11-month-old daughter, which is crazy. I have a picture of her. This is Esther. This is just manipulation that I'm doing on you. I'm showing a picture. She's so cute. She's 11 months, and there's coming a day when there will be a boy that tries to come in and take her out somewhere else. And I'm aware of this because a couple weeks ago, we had friends that have a little boy, and this is a picture of him and her together. No, don't laugh. Don't laugh. That's not funny. These are our friend. That's our friend's son. Well, our former friends. We're not friends anymore. And seeing this told me that there's coming a day, in about 30 years, when Esther's allowed to date, that there's going to be a boy that comes around and wants to take her out. And you better believe he's not climbing up any window. He's not going over any fence. Jesus is saying it matters how you come in. And this boy, whoever he is going to come to our front door, and he's going to knock, and he's going to give Catherine a hug, and he's going to shake my hand firmly. And I don't own a gun, but he doesn't know that, and he doesn't need to know that. I'll tell him I just got finished cleaning it, the classic thing. And he will ask to take Esther out. And I'm not going to like it, but I'll say yes. And then I'll follow them wherever they go. And this is good if you have a son that's 3 or 4 years old or younger. By the way, there's a lot of great churches in the city if that is you. I can give you a list if you need one. Woe to that man that tries to climb over our fence. Woe to that man that tries to come up to her bedroom window. That man, Jesus says it, not me, he's a thief, he's a robber, he's the reason that I do CrossFit. It's true. Number one rule of CrossFit, you have to talk about it. And what Jesus is saying is that it matters how you get to the place that you're trying to go. It doesn't just matter where you get to. The goal is to get inside the sheep pen, but Jesus is starting to build a case of actually, no, it even matters how you get there. If you're trying to climb in some other way, not going through the gate, you're a thief and a robber. And he's saying this, remember, he's saying this to Pharisees who were trying to get into God's presence, trying to earn favor with God some other way than the gate. Religion, works, effort, degrading other people. This was the strategy that Jesus is coming head on against. He's making a comment now against religion because he's setting it up in comparison to the gate. And then he says this, verse 2, the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. Now, Western shepherds, if you've seen them around, or especially in Texas, even Australia, Western shepherd mindset is that you drive your sheep, and you drive them from behind with dogs. So the shepherd drives the dogs drive the sheep. But Jesus is an Eastern man, and Eastern shepherding is very different. Eastern shepherding doesn't drive from behind, but a shepherd in the East would lead from out front with his voice, with noise. Because sheep can't see well, but they can hear really well. And this is a rhetorical question, but if you're a sheep, how would you want to be led? Which one sounds like a better way of leading? Because again, Jesus is saying that religion drives you to a response. Religion's driving you to some kind of a response, but Jesus always leads us to one. But he leads us to one from out ahead with his voice. And then he says that the sheep know his name, and he knows their name. And last week, if you were here, the big question I asked on Easter is really just a question John was asking us in his biography. Who is this man? Who is Jesus? Who is this man? And we're asking that question over and over again. This man, it seems like from verse 2, verse 3, is the kind of man or the kind of God that knows your name. Guys, that's crazy. And that's so Christian cliche. I almost didn't include that in here because I'm like, everybody knows he knows my name, and we've written songs about it. But I want you to stop and think about that for a second. Jesus knows your name. What does knowing someone's name and being able to call someone's name communicate? It communicates a level of proximity and intimacy. Jesus knowing your name means that there's a level of proximity and intimacy that he wants with you. So if I go to the bank and I give them my ID, because a name matters, they don't call me by my first name. To a bank teller, because there's no proximity, no intimacy, I'm just Mr. Marlin, right? I met a guest last week. It was their first time here. Maybe you're back today, and I know you were a guest because you called me Pastor Chris. And it's true, I am a pastor, but people that know me well, eventually I'll correct you and say I'm just Chris. My friends call me Chris. To my brother, who is younger than me but also taller, my name is Tiny. I respond to it because I'm dumb. He doesn't call me anything other than Tiny anymore. To my mom, I am just C, just the letter C. To Catherine, who's obviously the closest person to me, Catherine, she calls me, I probably shouldn't say that at church. Jesus calls you by name. Jesus calls you by name. That is crazy. The God of the universe knows your name because Jesus does not just love you, he likes you. Jesus likes you. He wants to know your name. He wants some kind of proximity and intimacy with you. Jesus doesn't just love you, but he likes you, and he calls you by name. And then it says, when he has brought all of his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. Instead, they will run away from him because they don't know the voice of strangers. Jesus gave them this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. So Jesus said again, truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. And Jesus is constantly making reference to the fact that there's a listening aspect of following him and knowing the name. And hearing God's voice is a really big deal. Learning how to hear God's voice, that's a big deal here. If you're new here, we talk a lot about hearing God's voice. And the primary way that we hear God's voice is through his word, knowing his word, reading his word. His voice sounds like this. And we love when God just breaks in and speaks on his own, but in addition to what he's already said here. And there's moments that God speaks to us, and it's supernatural. He tells us something that we needed to know. Other times, he just speaks something that's comforting. Last week was Easter, and at 9 a.m. every Sunday, we have a prayer meeting, and you're all welcome to come. We're praying over the global church, the Church of Cincinnati. We're praying for this service. It's a really sweet moment. And last week, there's always a moment where whoever's leading, so last week it was Dieter, and he was leading, and he said, hey, does anybody have a sense of something that God's saying? And remember, it's Easter. So a good image to conjure up would be like resurrection or the cross or something. And this is crazy. No one got saved. No one got healed of a disease. But God spoke. And God spoke to Mandy Oliai, who leads our house groups. And I have it here. She gave a word. She said, I just saw an image of a hand with dry, grayish, brown dirt. And life being breathed over it. It was like life was flowing from the dirt. So there was dirt, there was a hand, and there was life coming out of it. And a different Mandy, the Mandy who was painting on stage last week, turned around and said, that's what I'm painting. This is, super cool. And again, this didn't change our service. Revival hasn't broken out because God doesn't just speak on big things. He speaks on little things as well. There wasn't a huge thing that we needed to hear from that. It was a reminder that morning that God still speaks. And he speaks in big things and he speaks in little things. And on Easter, he's speaking to a couple different people that there is life coming out of dirt. There is something that's happening here, and last week was a blast. Somebody committed their life to Jesus. We had a blast partying because God is still on the move. And God says, or Jesus says, it's a big deal to hear my voice. And so as a church, we want to say it's a big deal to hear his voice. And then Jesus says this, and this is the phrase that we're kind of building to. This is the one that he says very clearly that has so much meaning. He says, I am the gate. Verse 9, I am the gate. Anyone who enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. And so Jesus says, look, there's three things that happen when you come into the gate. When you come into the gate, number one, you get saved. You get saved. He says you will be saved. Now, saved there has sort of, in not a bad way, but it means something different to evangelicals versus to first century Jews. That word that John records here, it's a Greek word, sozo, S-O-Z-O. And it means not just saved like later, it means to deliver, to protect, to heal. The primary definition, the definition that seems to be most prevalent, is to be made whole. So Jesus says, when you come in through the gate, you will be made whole. So this is way more than just getting into heaven later. This is what we talked about last week. It's not just about getting into heaven later, although that's part of it. But saved, when Jesus says saved, he says, no, I'm making you whole now. I'm starting the wholeness process now so that it's complete later. Jesus wants to make you whole. And what Jesus is saying here is whatever you need, I am. Do you need salvation? I am. Do you need healing? I am. Do you need restoration, forgiveness, mercy? Do you need eternal life? Jesus says, I am. Do you need forgiveness? Do you need to experience love like you've never experienced love before? And Jesus says, I am. So number one, Jesus said, when you come in through this gate, you will be made whole. Number two, he says, you will come in and you will go out. There's a freedom. You'll be set free. There is freedom when we enter through the gate. Now, inside of the sheep pen, just to clarify, Jesus is not talking about salvation, so this is not him talking about you can come in and out, and that's a whole other big theological thing. But what Jesus is saying is when you enter through me, there's a freedom. There's freedom that I offer you, and oftentimes, Christians, we are perceived, and sometimes we give off the illusion that we are some of the most constricted, confined people on the planet. And that is not true. We're not, and we're not following some old divine rule book that tries to keep us down. Jesus is not some divine downer, like sometimes I hear people think he is. No, Jesus actually gives us more freedom. We don't have to follow certain rules. We get to do that. Every Sunday morning, I love what Evu says. He reminds us sometimes that we don't have to do this. Like, we get to do this. We get to serve Jesus. And so there's elements of, yes, we behave differently. There's things we do differently. There's ways that I have changed the way that I act, or mindsets that I'm trying to change because of Jesus. But it's because of Jesus. It's because he's moving me towards it. We don't have to. We get to. We get to have a level of freedom that the rest of the world doesn't know when you come through the gate. And then number three, he says you'll find pasture, which means that he will provide provision. Pasture is basically the only thing that a sheep needs. And he says, if you come in, you will have everything that you need. Jesus in Matthew 6:26 said that he provides for the birds of the air. And then he says, how much more am I going to provide for you? So when you come through the gate, what Jesus is saying here, and he's saying it to a bunch of Pharisees, although other people are standing around, he says there's a few things you get wholeness, you get freedom, and you get provision when you enter this sheep pen, when you're in the safety of the sheep pen. But then he says there's a catch. It's that you've got to come through me. You have to come through the gate. Now, during the day, there was a gatekeeper. A bunch of shepherds would kind of pitch in together, and they would hire somebody to stand at the opening of the sheep pen. But that person is just a hired hand. They're not standing there for a long time. Really, when most of the danger comes, they go home. So what Jesus is saying is the gate is more of a function at night. And here's what's so interesting. And we don't get this because we aren't shepherds in the Near East, but this would have been a very confusing image. And if you remember from the first picture, you might understand why. Because what's interesting about a sheep pen is that there is no gate. So Jesus personifies himself as something that doesn't exist. See, we might see like a barn and a fence with like a big piece of wood on a hinge. That's what I picture when I see a gate, but actually that's not real. That's not what Jesus would have been referring to, because in a sheep pen, there is no gate. And so what's interesting is at the height of when trouble comes, when the wolves start to wake up at night, when the thieves and the robbers are probably at their highest activity, that's when the sheep go into the sheep pen, and they're surrounded 99% of the way around. And then there's an opening where there is no gate, because the gate is the shepherd. In Near Eastern shepherding, the shepherd at night would lay his body down in the opening of the gate, in the opening of the sheep pen. He wouldn't build more rocks up there. He didn't get a big log and put it there. He himself would lay himself down. The shepherd himself became the gate in the sheep pen. And so Jesus says, I'm that. You know the way that the shepherd is willing to lay his life down for the sheep so that they can have safety inside? That's me. That's what I'm doing. He himself, Jesus himself, became the gate for us. And so the gate, what we picture is an object, but the gate is not an object. The gate is a man. The gate is a man that was willing to lay his life down so that the sheep can have the fullness of life inside. And I think a lot of times we are hoping for a lot of the things that Jesus said we get. Wholeness, provision, but we're looking for something to give it to us. We're looking to objectify the gate. Where is the gate that gives me those things? And as long as we keep looking for something, we will not find it. If you're looking for a gate in a sheep pen, you will not find it, because the gate is not an object, but the gate is a man. Jesus offers wholeness. Jesus offers provision. Jesus gives us freedom. And Jesus says, I am that object. The object that doesn't exist. If you're looking for it in a covenant, the covenant's going to lead you to something. If you're looking for it in an object, it's going to lead you to something. What you're looking for is me. And a lot of times we look for these things in the outside, because the outside is much bigger than the inside. That whole field looks really appealing. That looks like what freedom is, but that is just a mirage. Provision is not out there. Wholeness is not out there. Safety certainly is not out there. And this morning, as I was preparing for this, I felt like there's some people in this room that have probably been running from the gate, because we've seen the gate as restrictive, rule-bearing, narrow-minded. And I want to make a different suggestion this morning. Whether you believe in this or you're still trying to figure it out, I want to make a different suggestion, that the gate is the most life-giving, free person in the world. And that inside the pen is actually the fullness of life, because the gate is love. Jesus is love. The gate is love. And if you have been running, if you're questioning, if you're not quite sure, I need you to know this about love. This is what love says. Love never says, I told you so. I told you that there was freedom in here and not out there. When you hit your wall, when whatever you were doing is failing, you might feel like the God of the universe would come to you and say, hey, I told you so. Or, hey, we'll split the cost on this. But love paid the whole price. Love asks us to come in, because love wants you just to come home. Just come home. Love is saying to you, just come home. Because love is open to everyone, but it has to come through the gate. And so we're going to worship the gate. And whether you believe in this, let's remind ourselves, what did you get when you walked through that gate for the first time? And if you're not quite sure, if you've been a while since you've made this decision or done anything around the Jesus thing, I want to ask this question. Are you willing to step in? And so the band's going to come up. We're going to worship. And I want to ask this, like, where are you looking for wholeness that's not him? Now, that's not just for the person that's not sure about Jesus. That's for me. Where am I looking for wholeness that's outside of the gate? Where are you trying to climb in to wholeness when you should just be knocking? Where is Jesus asking you to enter into? And specifically, if this is something that you're not quite sure about, I want to speak to you for a second. And I want you to just follow what I'm saying. If you've not made this decision, or if it's been a long time since you've really chosen to follow Jesus, years ago, and maybe you grew up in the church too, years ago, as I was growing up in the church in the 90s, belief, especially in the Midwest, belief was expected. You just expected people believed. And doubt at times was almost shamed. And a lot of things have changed in the last 20 years. A lot of things have changed in the last 5 years. Some of them have been good, but I think one thing that's changed is that skepticism is now not shameful. It's actually really common. Skepticism is actually, I think, celebrated in some ways. And I wonder if the most courageous thing you could do this morning is to believe. I wonder if the most almost subversive thing that you could do this morning is say, okay, I'm gonna step in the gate. I wonder if the most courageous thing that you could do is to tell the inner scoffer inside, okay, I'm gonna take a risk on this. It might be an old book, maybe it's outdated. I don't know what the deal with the music is that causes people to raise their hands. The scoffer wants you to stand on the outside, but I think belief's actually asking you to go somewhere else. So would you do one of the most subversive, rebellious, courageous things, and would you make a decision to believe? And so we're going to worship, and we're going to stand. And as we do that, there's going to be people that are in all four corners. They want to pray with you. They want to pray with you. And I want you to go and find them if this is a decision that you want to make, or if you just need prayer. And so let's stand. And for the person that's not sure, go talk to someone. Do something courageous. Believe. And if you have believed for a while, if you're like me, you grew up in the church and this has been a thing, let's remind ourselves, what did the gate actually bring us? What kind of freedom does he offer us? And we're going to worship him this morning.
The ground earth has quaked before, moved by the sound of his voice, and seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken from our regard. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well with me. Far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. In this mountain that's in front of me, will be thrown into the midst of the sea. Through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my get to know the person. So we don't want to be only talking about him and the things that we heard from other people. But let's step in to the game. Let's get to know him. He says, come close to me and I'll come close to you. I challenge you to take a step. But splendor of the King, clothed in majesty. Let all the earth rejoice. Let all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light. Darkness tries to hide and trembles at his voice. Trembles at his voice. This is your voice. How great is our God. Age to age, and age to age, he stands. Time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead, three in one. Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, we'll see how great. How great is our God? Name above all names. You're the name above all names. Worthy of all praise. My heart will sing. You're the name above all names. You're the name above all names. You are worthy, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great is our God. Let's go, it's cool. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Sing name above all names. You're the name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great is our God. How great, I can't stop. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, we'll see
And they sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God, from every tribe and language and people and nation, and you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." Then I looked, and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voice of many angels, numbering myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing." And I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever." Amen. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to seeing you in house groups this week. See you next week.